Welcome to the Depth Dive, where we take a stack of fascinating sources and try to pull out the key insights for you, our listener.
Yeah, unpack them a bit.
Exactly. And today we're diving deep into the writings and, well, the whole phenomenon surrounding Pietro Ubaldi. We're mainly using excerpts from his commentaries.
And for this deep dive, you've pulled together Ubaldi's own thoughts, some critical analyses of his work, from different thinkers and journals, and even some personal accounts about his experiences, which were, let's say, pretty unique.
Definitely unique. It's a really rich mix to get into.
For sure.
So, our mission today is to really get to the heart of Ubaldi's claims about his intuitive process. How did he say his big work, The Great Synthesis, actually came about?
Right, that's central.
And we also want to understand the core of this great synthesis itself, and I suppose why it sparked such varied reactions, everything from huge support to outright condemnation.
It definitely polarized people.
So let's start at the beginning. Who exactly was Pietro Ubaldi?
Okay. Pietro Ubaldi. He was born in Italy, Foligno, back in 1886. And according to him, right from a young age, he felt different. He even called it a kind of slow martyrdom.
Wow, slow martyrdom. That's intense.
It is. And interestingly, he described himself as, academically mediocre. But when you read his stuff, it's clear he was incredibly reflective.
Right. Not your typical academic background, then.
Not at all. He talked about his spiritual growth as this slow, gradual thing with these deep layers of consciousness surfacing over time.
So not like a sudden lightning bolt moment, more of a slow burn.
Exactly. He even said his early writing attempts were chaotic, discordant, like he was working through things internally, a kind of school of preparation, he called it.
And he looked back on those early attempts as, what was it, abortions of thought, especially when compared to the Great Synthesis.
Yeah, he really contrasted them. And a really crucial point he hammered home was that the great synthesis wasn't something he cooked up through traditional study or research.
Right.
It came from an internal thread.
Okay, so that's key. He's claiming intuition, not scholarship, as the source. That's a pretty direct challenge to how we usually think about where profound ideas come from.
Absolutely. He was actively pushing back against the idea it was just book learning. He insisted it stemmed from a deep inner experience, which leads us right into the emergence of what he called his voice.
Right, his voice.
Yes.
This is where it gets really fascinating, isn't it? He points to a specific time, a difficult period in Sicily in 1931, Christmas night, actually.
Yeah, a very significant inner event for him. He marks that as when he received the first message.
And how did he describe this voice?
He said it spoke to him internally, reminding him of how Christ speaks in the Gospels, offering guidance, advice, that sort of thing.
Internally, so not an audible voice.
He described it as an interior audition of concepts, which is interesting. It implies this direct understanding, almost like getting ideas downloaded straight into his mind, not necessarily formed into words at first.
Concepts, not words. And separate from his normal thinking.
Totally distinct, he said. And he even noted that initially there were discussions and divergences between his regular self and this voice. It took time for them to reach a kind of harmony.
So it wasn't just passive reception, at least not at first. There was interaction.
It seems so. He also felt these superior forces were operating within him, and he observed things shifting quickly around him, thought translating into action very rapidly.
And these experiences started showing up in his work pretty quickly.
Yeah, he mentions a rapid series of publications detailing all this. And it wasn't just him saying it was important. He got positive feedback, validation even from some prominent figures in metapsychics. That's like the study of paranormal stuff and spiritualism. People like Professor Bazzano and Bragadin.
Okay, Bazzano and Bragadin, what did they say?
Well, Bazzano was quite impressed. He described Ubaldi's messages as having a transcendental origin and being of very high inspiration. Later, he called one message stupendous with sublime passages. Quite strong endorsements.
That is significant validation, especially from someone established in that field back then. It lends some weight to Ubaldi's claims about the source.
Definitely. And Bragadin expressed his own astonishment, basically wondering how such profound work could just emerge from Ubaldi, seemingly without years of preparation.
So how did Ubaldi himself explain this seemingly unprepared emergence, his own understanding of the process?
It's quite remarkable. He insisted it wasn't abnormal, extraordinary, or miraculous. For him, it was simply a question of the paths traveled.
A path, meaning
A path he believed was open to anyone. But it required a serious process of purification, not just spiritual purification, but of the body, of thought, even of diet. He advocated a whole regime, both spiritual and dietary.
A holistic approach then, body and spirit interconnected.
Absolutely. He talked about needing to expel inferior substances that had a slow and heavy vibration. It really underlines that mind-body connection in his view of spiritual development. He even suggested medicine and mysticism needed to collaborate on this.
And how was this purification achieved?
He said it involved casting off the inferior animal nature through detachment, sublimation, and, interestingly, especially through pain.
Pain. That seems counterintuitive to spiritual growth for many.
Right. But Ubaldi saw it as vital. He said pain was often present in his life and was the most active factor in forming his inspiration and spirituality. He felt it clarified his mind, not study, and allowed what was already deep inside him to surface.
Pain as a catalyst for inner knowing. That's a challenging idea.
It is. He then goes on to describe this really profound inner dialogue, almost like a contract, he calls it, with his voice.
A contract.
Yeah, he portrays it as this indescribable conversation where the will at the center of the universe, as he put it, respected his freedom, but asked for his consent to undertake this mission.
And he agreed.
Unconditionally. He said his yes marked the point where his own will became one with his voice, a total alignment.
That's a huge turning point, and the Great Synthesis followed this.
Yes. Publication started in 1933. Apparently, it began with just a rough outline, but it evolved way beyond that initial plan. Ubaldi clearly felt this immense sense of mission driving it, emphasizing the purity of his intentions.
Did he mention any sort of external proof or confirmation for these inner experiences?
He did. The commentaries talk about correspondences he perceived between his inner states and actual events happening externally. Things he felt couldn't just be explained away as subconscious quirks or, pathology.
Like synchronicities, almost.
Kind of. He also mentioned sensing a prescience of a logical plan, guiding things, something beyond his own conscious ability to formulate.
And wasn't there something about messages from other mediums?
Yes, that's another intriguing part. He talks about receiving confirming messages from mediums he didn't even know, people far away. He names Marjorie the Roe, who apparently foresaw the disorder of the world, as a theme he'd write about, and someone named Valbenizzi offering support.
Wow. And messages from a master.
Urging him to spread the message of Christ's resurrection. So, multiple threads of confirmation, at least in his view.
And Professor Bassano's support continued.
It grew even stronger. Eventually, Bassano called the Great Synthesis the most extraordinary scientific mediumistic message known in metapsychics. High praise indeed.
Why did Ubaldi share these endorsements? Was it self-promotion?
He claimed not. He said it was for moral support, given the weight of the task, to sort of alleviate the immense responsibility he felt, and also to shed light on what he called the strange phenomenon of mediumship itself.
Makes sense. So ultimately, who did he say wrote The Great Synthesis?
He attributed it entirely to the source to which I owe everything. He felt it happened only after he'd completely offered himself up. He saw the work as belonging to the world now, while he just waited obediently for more guidance.
Like a conduit.
Precisely. And the commentaries even include some specific messages he reported receiving, attributed to forms like spirit innocence and he who I am, which he identified as his voice.
What was the gist of those messages?
Assurances, really. Guidance, strength, reminders of the importance of his mission to speak to the world. They emphasized his role was chosen, his path kind of inevitable, but also stressed the need for ongoing purification and patience.
So, looking ahead, how did Ubaldi see his work fitting into the bigger picture?
He viewed it as a contribution to what he called the splendor of the third millennium, something he believed would emerge from the tempests of his own turbulent times.
The third millennium. Ambitious.
Very. He marked the start of his mission with the single word surge, and felt his subsequent spiritual messages launched this whole revelatory task. He also pointed to the growing impact recognition in the press, both secular and spiritual, and even some initial approval from high-up figures in the Italian Catholic Church.
That initial approval is interesting, given what happened later. What about reactions from outside religious or spiritual circles? Any notable ones?
Well, the big one is Albert Einstein.
Einstein, really? What did he think?
Einstein acknowledged getting Ubaldi's books, and his reaction was intriguing. He described the content as strange but agreeable to his rationalist mind.
Strange but agreeable. That's quite something coming from Einstein. It suggests he didn't just dismiss it out of hand.
Exactly. It shows a kind of cautious openness, maybe. And apparently they didn't just exchange letters. They had discussions, correspondence covering science, philosophy, morality, religion, spiritual stuff.
A meeting of minds, in a way. How did Ubaldi see Einstein?
Ubaldi saw Einstein as incredibly powerful, a genius in the rational mathematical world, but maybe more like a common man, as he put it, outside that specific zone. He thought it was a result of the intense scientific specialization of the era. But he did repeat Einstein's phrase, strange but agreeable.
Did Einstein comment specifically on any of Ubaldi's ideas relating to physics?
Apparently so. He mentioned Ubaldi's concept of a dynamic protoform of gravitation, and he actually suggested Ubaldi pursue it further, through calculation, predicting it could lead to revolutionary discoveries.
Einstein said that. Wow.
Yeah. He also noted how the bending of light by gravity, which Einstein's own theory predicted and was later confirmed, seemed to align with some of Ubaldi's thinking.
Fascinating. Ubaldi also had these cosmic formulas, didn't he?
He did. Two main ones. One for involution substance moving towards disorder, disintegration, kind of like entropy.
Falling away, basically.
Right. And the other for evolution, spirit, liberating itself from matter, rising towards truth and God. He saw this second one as the key, the universe's ultimate formula, where the end meets the beginning.
A grand cosmic cycle. Did he see his early messages as prophetic?
He certainly did. Looking back, he felt they aligned remarkably well with how historical events actually unfolded later, especially things like anticipating a new spiritual civilization, major global changes, and even a world cataclysm. He felt these were clearly playing out a decade after he wrote them.
Like a warning, a call to gather.
That's exactly how he described it, a call to gather before these apocalyptic events. He also had this historical perspective, criticizing the church for, in his view, getting too caught up in worldly power instead of focusing on the kingdom of God.
He felt the spirit of Christianity had dimmed.
Yeah, especially after the Roman Empire fell. He thought the true spirit was largely missing from the consciousness of supposedly Christian nations.
But he did find support elsewhere. You mentioned Bazzano again and other mediums.
Yes, he describes getting spontaneous messages from mediums he didn't know, offering encouragement. And Professor Bazzano became an even stronger supporter, really championing the transcendental nature of Ubaldi's mediumship, seeing it as incredibly valuable for understanding the supranormal.
Bazzano thought Ubaldi's work could actually improve existing philosophies.
He did, by adding this spiritual light that he felt even reason would find compelling.
People also noted the internal logic of Ubaldi's work, right? Even though he claimed not to be consciously planning it all out.
Exactly. Its organic development was seen as remarkable. There's even a quote praising Ubaldi's rigid spiritual severity, that discipline, again, as being necessary for his gift to function. The sheer competence across so many different fields, coming from someone without obvious qualifications, was a major point of discussion.
Did people try to identify the source, beyond just his voice?
Some attributed to the highest spiritual personalities. But there was also this interesting reference to Professor Mead studying Confucius, manifesting through a medium. Mead questioned if pinpointing the exact source was always the most important thing, compared to acknowledging the profound knowledge being transmitted.
A focus on the message over the messenger's specific identity.
Kind of, yeah. Meanwhile, Bragadin was publicly calling for Ubaldi's work to be spread more widely. There was clearly a buzz building.
You mentioned upcoming studies, a surge in publications. It sounds like it gained momentum.
It really did. It suggests a powerful resonance, maybe even a kind of predetermined movement, as some saw it. People were even comparing it to major spiritual texts, like spirit teachings.
How did Ubaldi describe the actual process of receiving these ideas? What did it feel like?
He described it as becoming sensitized, like tuning into thought waves from space, usually at night. He said his normal consciousness would kind of recede, and he'd feel moved by this unknown force.
Not seeing or hearing it physically?
No, more like feeling a presence, an energy within his nervous system. But it had the characteristics of a distinct human personality, he said. He found it amazing that a whole scientific and social movement could spring up from these moment-by-moment inspirations, like a perfectly built structure appearing out of nowhere. He could attribute it to anything other than an intelligent cause from another unseen world.
And it wasn't an easy process getting the Great Synthesis published.
No. He mentioned it being an arduous journey, especially as the work grew so much in scope, and others were watching him, trying to understand. Emma Tedeschi and Mario Brandi had their own theory about his divine apparatus.
His divine apparatus? What did they mean?
They proposed that most humans can't perceive these hyperphysical currents from the superior element of this apparatus. But they thought Ubaldi's physical being, his inferior element, could resonate with them, thanks to what they called the science of the beyond.
So his body was like a receiver tuned to a specific frequency.
That's the idea. They believed great inspirations come through this channel, and that Ubaldi's work, the dispensation as they called it, actually revealed how this hyperphysical receptor works, going beyond things like chakras and opening up the sciences of the hyperphysical. They urged scholars of biosophy, this holistic life philosophy, to study it seriously.
And Bragadin, in his preface to the book, how did he frame it?
He placed it right within these major movements working to save humanity's spiritual values, especially timely given the civilizational crisis he saw happening. He argued the scientific language wasn't just academic talk, but a way to convey a living reality working for good. He stressed the objective facts and confirmations surrounding it, pushing back against it being just opinion.
He also mentioned the intuitive technique detailed in Asner's.
Yes, highlighting how rigorous and conscious Ubaldi's process was, despite being intuitive. Bragadin talked about humanity entering an organic period, accelerated by intellectual ignorance, and saw Ubaldi's organic view of the universe as fitting the times perfectly, explaining things like command and obedience on the path to unity.
And he confirmed the positive reception.
Definitely. He basically said that for anyone with an open mind, the depth, the organic nature, the sincerity, and the good aims of the work were undeniable. He called it the divine voice of nature speaking through Ubaldi.
What was Ubaldi's own stated intention for the work?
Are very clear: to elevate the human spirit through sacrifice and to offer science to faith, bridging that gap. He wanted to combat materialism using a language different from traditional theology.
Which led him to ask that rhetorical question about the church.
Right. Could the church, dedicated to good, really condemn a work so sincerely aimed at good and aligned with the gospel spirit? He saw his work as potentially providing a rational, even scientific basis for faith, especially for those who struggled with traditional approaches.
He didn't want to force phenomena into pre-existing boxes.
Exactly. He argued against that. He said the great synthesis wasn't about attacking other systems, but creating harmony, the law of higher planes, as he saw it. He almost regretted having to use rational arguments at all.
Did he worry the church itself had focused too much on rationalization?
He did voice that concern, wondering if it had strayed from the gospel spirit. He even interpreted the Tues Petrus passage, Peter being the rock, as conditional on upholding that spirit. His fight, he said, wasn't with science itself, but with materialism. He wanted to elevate science.
He seemed frustrated by people seeking personal gain instead of the harder path of doing good.
Yeah, a fundamental misunderstanding, he felt. He also acknowledged his work might go beyond existing frameworks like biosophy. And he was careful to define terms like monism in his own non-materialistic way, emphasizing a continuously creative universe.
Even suggesting God expands with human spiritual progress.
An intriguing idea, yeah. His goal was to revive faith by reconnecting theology to its intuitive roots.
So, the great synthesis wasn't meant as dry doctrine.
Not at all. He saw it as a seed for growth, a prelude to action in life. He argued condemning him, the man, wouldn't solve the core problem of the spirit. He tried clarifying things in later books, doing what his conscience allowed. He even felt silence might be a greater fault than speaking imperfectly, given the positive impact he saw it having, giving people guidance, hope, courage.
He also seemed convinced about a coming world cataclysm.
Yes, he saw it as inevitable because humanity, he believed, primarily learns through harsh experience. He hoped his work would help people understand it and provide a basis for a new way of living afterwards. Breaking free from materialistic illusions was crucial.
An urgency, then, to prepare people with the bread of the gospel in a living, demonstrable form.
Exactly. He noted the paradox of shallow media succeeding while profound work struggles, but held on to the hope of redemption through suffering, like Christ's path.
He felt his work aligned with the impulse of the hour.
Strongly. And he observed the book spreading almost on its own, making him wonder, who gives it this power? Some called him an apostle for the future, appealing to both heart and mind.
An anchor of salvation in a time of crisis.
That's how it was framed, with the hope it would guide people to truth. Even in Brazilian editions, a message attributed to Emmanuel called it a light emerging from a great silent voice during Western decline, contrasting it with Italy's secularization.
What about Ubaldi's personality? What comes through?
Descriptions paint him as lively, passionate, driven by love and duty, a keen observer, self-disciplined, appreciative of the tradition, but very future-oriented, able to connect with fundamental emotions.
It was suggested that people unmoved by these big ideas might not be part of the coming era.
A strong statement, yeah.
Yeah.
He defined the people, not by class, but as those who suffer, aspire, are free in spirit, not bound by rigid systems. He believed they had an intuitive grasp of truth in key moments.
But he also saw the difficulty for the people to reach spiritual receptivity without help.
Yes, acknowledging a need for a broader knowledge base requiring inner reform. He called for a new kind of intellectual and spiritual alpinism, a tough climb.
In As-Nur, he analyzed his own intuitive process more deeply, didn't he?
He did. He stressed needing a peaceful, resonant environment for intuition. He described the epic state, senses dormant, inner life surfacing on a new plane.
What was that state like?
Thought returning with titanic sensation, sharp lucidity, rapid, wordless conceptions, a feeling of lightness, liberation, immense intuitive power, commanding a new conceptual dimension, seeing beyond sensory reality to the forces moving the world.
Seeing the forces themselves.
Yes, these forces becoming alive, each form embodying a divine concept. The universe felt like a vast organism governed by God's thought. He even described an inner dialogue with awakened sister creatures leading to this immense embrace, annihilation, and light. Science itself became just one moment within this expanded awareness.
So he saw this as a whole new technique of thought, more powerful than the scientific method.
That's exactly how he proposed it. He saw the standard inductive experimental method as limited, needing a shift for deeper progress and unity. He argued we need to return to universal principles first, to understand phenomena properly.
He didn't see his own case as abnormal, but as normal sublimation.
Right. A demonstration that true, deep science is reached through inner harmonization with life's laws and the divine. The paths to knowledge are internal, he insisted. The great Nur, that higher intellect he captured, was the harmonic emanation of God's infinite thought.
He talked about seeing a conceptual center in an abyss.
During heightened states, yes. Accessing a new sight, new non-physical senses, direct supersensory perception. Seeing the principle moving things, not just the surface.
Like seeing the law within the phenomenon itself. Atoms, electricity, planets.
Exactly. Each phenomenon contains its own law. He compared the experimental method to being blind and relying only on touch. His intuitive method, guided by a personal sense of truth, gave direct insight into the laws of being, non-being, good, evil, freedom.
He also discussed pleasure and pain again in this context.
Yes, the complication of pleasure for the unevolved becoming an end, not a means, perverting higher aims. And pain, even punishment, as potentially redemptive, instruments of progress, though misunderstood by many.
The need to accept incurable pain, see work as duty and mission.
Rebelling against the nature of things was irrational, he felt. Evolution is conquering consciousness, freedom, happiness. Involution is the reverse. The cause of evils is human baseness. The remedy is spiritual ascent.
So aspiring to joy is right, but happiness requires work.
The work of conquering it, yes. The gospel path is thorny but leads to paradise on earth. It all points to needing a coherent shift in how modern life is conceived.
He contrasted uncivilized and civilized consciousness.
Sharply. Uncivilized consciousness fixated on moments, isolated in self-interest, unable to collaborate. Civilized consciousness as a gigantic unified force. He saw law guiding energy to animate matter, elevated to life, then to psychism.
And evolution is cyclical, nothing lost.
Right. Lower movements reborn at higher octaves. Everything stays within the progressive cycle.
But he warned about egoism leading to destruction.
Definitely. General war. He saw evolution's tendency as reducing egoism. An economic world based on egoism is doomed to crises, he thought.
His solution wasn't state control like Bolshevism.
No, not creating irresponsible masses. The solution was fostering responsible individuals who consciously manage economic forces through cooperation.
And the state's primary role.
An instrument of human ascent. Its value measured by its educational impact. The principle of order works individually and socially. The center, the governing force, gets stronger through individual adherence, and individuals find fulfillment within that order.
Force is only needed for unsubdued animality.
That was his view. The state needs a broad conception of life and should promote it. Maybe start with mass organization, but the future focus should be penetrating souls.
In his ideal new state, individuals mature towards the superhuman.
Yes, biologically even. Social forces are disciplined for collective elevation. Lower instincts atrophy as the focus shifts to higher spiritual goals.
How did his ideas compare to Gnosticism?
He saw parallels. Both aim for liberation through esoteric science cosmogony, precepts for divinization. Christian Gnostics were apostles of revealed wisdom, not just philosophers.
But a key difference.
Dualism. Gnosticism often has that sharp good-evil spirit-matter split. Ubaldi embraced his redefined monism, seeing God's mind and hand in nature and matter. That led him to a fundamental optimism.
And the method of intuition, he didn't see it as exclusively his.
Not at all. He said philosophers and psychologists knew it. It's accessible to anyone with the right inner discipline, training, catharsis, tension. Practiced by yogis, Neoplatonists, Sufis, Christian mystics, and saints throughout history.
Yet the church often rejected the fantastical.
Historically, yes, and things seen as divisive. The fact they were silent on the Great Synthesis for 5 years initially suggests maybe caution or prudence.
The commentaries also mention philosophical context, like attempts to revive German idealism against positivism.
Right, and the neo-scholastics trying to reclaim the object, needing to heed Pope Leo XIII's call to be relevant, like Aquinas was in his day. It all highlights the contrast. Ubaldi's seemingly ordinary background versus this profound work.
And the mystical tradition within Christianity itself.
Absolutely. Figures like Peter Lombard, followers of St. Francis, they prioritize affectus, feeling, experience, over pure cognitio, knowledge. Mysticism as a valid path to contemplating matter, soul, God.
So some saw Ubaldi as renewing this tradition after centuries.
Yes, renewing a luminous tradition. His Eseques Mystica was seen as small but hugely significant, accessible, focused on genuine revelation. He seemed indifferent to trivialities, focused on his inner voices or genius.
Adding new weight to ancient ideas while being original.
That's how it was seen. Original motives, concordances, structure. His triphasic universe. Matter, gamma, energy, beta, spirit, alpha, all ascending infinitely to God.
What about critiques? La Recherche Psychica reviewed the Great Synthesis.
They did. They admitted it was hard to critique so broad, profound, novel technique, original process. They praised the serious presentation.
What did they see as its aim?
Elevating the new civilization of the third millennium from materialism to spirituality. They noted how religions, even Christianity, had often obscured the divine spark and lacked sincere mass faith.
So they saw Ubaldi's work as trying to reawaken the spirit.
Exactly. Directed towards spirituality. They felt the times were ripe for new scientific discoveries leading to new orientations anyway. They described his method, exterior to interior, surface to core, multiplicity to the fundamental one, directing everything, aiming for a new cosmic consciousness.
Did the review acknowledge the difficulty of objectivity?
Yes, openly. Critics are influenced by their own knowledge and spiritual development. It's subjective. They highlighted the unique nature of the book, trying to give meaning to everything in human life, connecting it all to human ascent. Many topics went beyond a typical religious studies journal scope.
But they did focus on the affirmation of spirit as reality.
Absolutely. Seeing its discovery as the greatest future scientific discovery, revolutionizing the world, starting a new era, especially after atomic discoveries.
How did they frame Ubaldi's view of evolution?
As redemption and possession, differing from a solely Christ-centric view, his Genesis interpretation. Symbolic, God not external but intimate, operating within everything.
The error being separating the soul of man from the soul of things?
Yes, he saw them as expressions of God at different levels, obeying the same law, God, manifesting as goodness and justice, the highest expression, the gospel of Christ. Understanding it leads to the kingdom of God.
They contrasted this with materialistic views.
Right. Views where spirit is just a byproduct. Mention Hippocrates versus Aristotle on nature. They presented Ubaldi's view of death, not dying, but returning to the cosmic element, dissipating into ether, energy, essence, constant transformation.
Did the review discuss the mechanism of his inspiration?
It touched on his experience of his organism being subject to a superior will, sometimes calmly, sometimes with shocks. It raised the possibility of messages reaching him from other humans via the cosmic ether, requiring an exceptional nervous system.
Likening the nervous system to radio antennas.
Exactly. Receiving and transmitting waves. Synchronicity between brains via electromagnetic waves. Brain reception, feeling, irradiation as results of cervical antenna vibrations, potentially received by other brains on the same wavelength.
So ether or other humans, either way, he felt compelled to write.
Yes. The reviewer noted the author's Ubaldi's statement that humans think they govern but always obey nature's will through instinct. Instinct defined not just as feeling, but a powerful, impersonal force.
Though the reviewer suggested the impersonal nature might be subjective illusion.
A possibility raised, yes, and acknowledging the huge difficulty of translating these subtle neuric currents into inadequate human language.
What about the review of Eseques Mystica in the same journal?
Similar challenges noted appreciating mystical works based on affirmation, not demonstration, coming from a higher plane. but they acknowledged its merit, the award it won.
The reviewer felt limited by their own experience.
Candidly admitted it, yeah. So they focused on its potential for spiritual education and psychic investigation. Inspiration presented as evolved mediumship, passive to active and conscious, aiming to connect humanity to higher planes, the superconscious.
Praised its exaltation of love and virtue.
Profoundly impactful, they said, valuable for bringing good and comfort, especially in threatening times. Reading it was described as a fantastic journey, atomic to galactic, ending in divine embrace, leading to conviction of a new revelation.
Revelation defined broadly.
Very broadly, not just founding religions, but any contact of the soul with the inner thought of creation, revealing new aspects of truth. The Great Synthesis seen as a new revelation in that sense.
Despite criticisms, the review stressed Ubaldi's sincerity and modesty.
Yes, he always attributed it to forces beyond him, the reviewer argued. If the content is admired for its height, nobility, depth, style, and the author says he's just a receiver, doesn't that mean it's a message from a mysterious source, both teaching and warning?
And again, too vast to summarize easily.
Impossible. They noted its links to occultism, as aristocratic knowledge, and modern psychology, explaining ancient mystical intuitions.
Did they list specific topics covered?
Mention God, creation, evolution, morality, politics, economics, authority, too many to detail. But all associative life problems unfolded harmoniously with the spiritual problem under a beneficial law leading to unification with the eternal.
Calling Ubaldi a possible prophet for the 20th century.
They raised that possibility, delivering a new message in a time of crisis. A book's effectiveness lies in the nobility of its teaching, the height of its aims. Recommended reading and meditation with purity of heart and intelligence.
And the timing, a decadent era preparing ground for mystical rebirth.
Paradoxically, yes. They also rejected a view of solitary self-mortification, contrasting it with Christ's mandate to preach and love one's neighbor.
How did they handle judging a mystic's claims?
Acknowledge the difficulty. How can you judge claims of hearing the divine based on your own limitations? They questioned if Ubaldi could really be lying so consistently, intelligently, producing such spiritual work. Are such heights possible? Or are mystics deluded?
Your conclusion.
Such heights are possible. Disbelief stems from ignorance of life's laws. They mentioned his vow at Assisi, offering his life for humanity, meaning his life wasn't his own anymore.
But maybe a criticism, expecting contemporaries to understand his struggle.
A mild one, yeah. Essays Mystica, seen as a lived novel of ascent, like St. Francis. Ubaldi rejecting riches for a spiritual ideal, but judging his soul state. Subjective, only valid for those who feel similarly. Maybe Ubaldi was superior in mastering his material self.
Then came the condemnation by the Holy Office.
Yes, of both the Great Synthesis and Essays Mystica. This caused surprise, especially for those who knew Ubaldi as devout. The Ubaldi phenomenon deserves scholarly attention, they felt.
This led to questions about dogma versus philosophy.
Big questions. Are scholasticism's specific forms integral to dogma? Or are other thought orientations possible within Catholic truth? Aquinas was a genius, but human intellect has limits. Revelation is different. Scholasticism is a current of thought, not a revelation itself.
So questioning the dogmatization of scholasticism.
Exactly. While the Church must defend doctrine, should specific philosophical formulations be dogmatized? Kant and Croce departed from scholasticism innovation, not heresy. Philosophy isn't bound by theology. Philosophical systems change. Should revelation be bound to reason via dogmatizing a human expression like scholasticism?
Could post-Aquinas thinkers still contribute truth?
The review argued yes. Human thought ascends continuously, even if revelation is fixed. Crucially, Ubaldi's terms needed interpreting in his context, not forced into predefined theological slots.
Essays Mystica seen as Ubaldi reaching higher spheres.
Yes. Spheres of feeling, duty, love. Guided by introspection and devotion to Christ's example, recommended reading its passionate pages, reflecting his deep Christian soul.
What was the impact of the condemnation?
It prompted observation and investigation from those free from doctrinal prejudice. Easy to impose prohibitions on the masses, hard to hinder the Spirit's forces.
The argument being, if the work is mostly error, condemnation is late and ineffective.
Right. But if mostly truth, it's useless, arbitrary, vexatious. It might even confirm the judgment of those who understand it. A plea to replace violence against the Spirit with love, persuasion, guidance. Such violence lacks substance.
How did Ubaldi himself respond?
His guiding principle: what higher content can be given to life than to fight and suffer for an ideal? He affirmed respect for authority as duty. His sole aim, good. His method, fraternal love, the gospel.
He felt a duty to inform honest individuals.
Yes, not satisfy the vain or aggressive. Maintain a spiritual plane, exclude base sentiments. He went through a period of waiting, introspection, reevaluating everything before God, prioritizing responsibilities. Needed the heroic psychology of martyrdom
He felt misunderstood.
deeply, especially his affirmations in My Position at Esse Mystica. His case was complex, evolving outside common thought patterns. Labels applied, medium, spiritualist, scholar, etc., none fit. Modern psychology prefers specialists, struggles with dynamic phenomena.
He acknowledged the church needed certain forms historically.
Yes, but questioned if logical coercion works today. Conviction is deeper than pure reason. Figures like St. Francis, even Christ, might be misunderstood now. He expected to be seen as fanatic, hallucinated, rebellious due to the different languages.
The mystic psychology not understood by earlier phases.
That was his view. The well-understood mystic is the type evolution tends towards. His own experience confirmed by reading other mystics, different senses, psychic life forms. He referenced the rights of conscience versus authority. Human scripture.
The mystic seen as mad, but progress comes through them.
Yes, those who sense God better and sacrifice to express it. With evolved consciousness, the being is free, humanly uncoercible, divine justice for effort. Spirit reached by divine means, not human. Mystic embraces pain for progress, struggle based on incomprehension, different languages.
Growing sense of God's presence amidst assault and suffering.
He described that, yes. Judging a mystic requires ascending beyond reason to the spirit. He addressed the accusation of pride, a known deterrent, mentioned his own act of maximum personal humiliation without compromising truth.
He couldn't claim paternity of the great synthesis, but couldn't retract it.
Exactly. Attributed to untraceable inspiration, couldn't take it back. Done before God, with initial approval, continuous divine help, retraction would be betrayal of an accepted mission.
The dilemma, church or God?
That was the core conflict. His initial submission showed goodwill, not rebellion. But he couldn't deny a deeply felt truth he'd die for. Weariness, desire for peace, versus conscience demanding adherence to truth.
So his conclusions on the condemnation.
Initial bewilderment, didn't understand the reasons, but respected authority. Saw the book spreading by its own force. Received spontaneous solidarity from readers who felt helped by it. Silence, observation, meditation, wondering if God willed it for higher purposes.
Core principles remain.
Respect for authority, for social order, Christian faith, dedication to good, humbled himself before the church, but couldn't recant inspired truth, deep conviction. As Nures and Esse Mystica explain this, for him it was objective, experienced fact.
Recanting betrayal of God and mission.
Yes, hard to impose on sincere conviction. Rebel or traitor to truth, that was the choice. His explanation of mystic psychology wasn't denying the church's role as preserver.
He argued for active creative elements alongside social intellectual ones in religion.
Prophets, mystics, saints are necessary. Neglecting their contribution is as serious as theological error or rebellion. Religions are life cycles. Must conscience always be disruptive?
Spirit of gospels, far from rational coercion, affectus over intellectus.
That was his argument, citing St. Paul, great mystics. God not a theorem, but living reality. Felt his anxieties reflected the world's before new questions. Danger of massification and organizations need renewal from the source, reach God again.
Letter trying to judge the spirit. Reason versus intuition, like surface versus volume.
Yes. Can theology scholasticism measure inspired works? Need balance. Form substance, letter spirit, independence conservation. Danger of letter killing spirit leading to indifference. Judgment needs to consider substance spirit, not just form critique.
Should personal conscience be suffocated by others' judgments?
A poignant question. He addressed the accusation of being a cunning deceiver, suspicion common in the modern era. Asked for deep examination of his work and intentions.
Reactions in the press.
Catholic press echoed the Holy Office. Spiritualist press defended Ubaldi. Excessive language on both sides. Condemnation was surprising, distressing to him, led to his 1939 Declaration of Obedience. Church defending its structure.
Bishop of Gubbio responded.
Yes. Two main errors attributed. Evolutionary pantheism, philosophical immanence both condemned. Specific conflicts. God, equating with creation. Creation rejecting ad extra. Soul, not divine substance eternal. Acknowledged other statements might be reconcilable if clarified, but difficult in context. Focus on openly contradictory doctrines.
So, to wrap up our deep dive, Pietro Ubaldi's story, as we see in his commentaries, is just incredibly compelling, isn't it? We've looked at his claims of this unique, intuitive process, the experience of his voice, the huge scope of the great synthesis, trying to link science and spirit.
Absolutely. And we've seen that whole spectrum of reactions from really enthusiastic endorsements, figures in metapsychics, even that intriguing openness from Einstein, all the way to the strong opposition that led to the official condemnation by the Holy Office.
Yeah, his personal journey really throws those big, enduring questions into sharp relief, doesn't it? Questions about inspiration itself. Where does it come from? How do we even judge its validity? And it forces us to look at that complex, sometimes difficult relationship between individual experience and established authority.
Right. And that ongoing dialogue or sometimes tension between faith and reason.
For me, some key aha moments were really grasping his insistence on that non-traditional intuitive path to knowledge
Right.
and seeing how his very personal, deeply felt experiences wove into these huge universal themes he tackled.
And understanding the specific historical context, too, that really shaped how his ideas were received or, not received.
Definitely. This whole exploration really shines a light on those persistent tensions. The
Right.
individual versus the institution, intuition versus reason, the material versus the spiritual. It's all there.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, our listener. Thinking about Ubaldi's extraordinary claims and the really polarized reactions they caused. What does that tell us about the challenges, maybe the inherent difficulties, of integrating genuinely new spiritual or philosophical insights into established ways of thinking, into established frameworks?
Hmm. Where's the balance? How do you find that sweet spot between the power of personal revelation, which can be so transformative, and the need for communal understanding, for shared meaning, for validation?
It's a huge question, and maybe particularly relevant today, something definitely worth mulling over long after this deep dive ends.